Chapter 6 Intrigue Immediately after the meeting, Sinapo climbed more rapidly than usual to charge altitude. He kept his hook aggressively forward, something he almost never did when he was climbing to charge, and he paid no attention to Sarko, who was climbing in his wake. Again, something neither a Cerebron nor a Mystrian did when there was the least possibility of someone sharing the climb. In short, he was exceedingly irritated with Sarko, and he wanted Sarko to know it. As he climbed, he radioed the local Mystrian weather station for the optimum altitude in the compensator zone, and the corresponding stability quotient, and the forecast for the afternoon. He had some deep cognition to do, and he wanted optimum conditions in which to do it. First, there was the matter of internal tribe dominance. That took precedence over Sarko's unsettling behavior. He would get to that, and the assurance had given the aliens that he could live with a compensator efficiency of 99.2. Sarko had not questioned his conclusion. By Nimbard he better not have. But Sinapo wasn't all that sure in his own mind how the Cerebrons might react to it. They were much more sensitive to small disturbances in the weather than were the Maestria. The weather was important, but in the short term it was the possibility of one of the elites striking for tribal dominance that had him most concerned. There was a definite hierarchy throughout the Cerebron pack, but it was exceptionally rigid among the members of the elite, who currently numbered 11. If one of them were striking and involved him now, it could seriously undermine his relations with Sarko and his negotiations with the aliens. That was his primary concern. He thought of himself more as a statesman than a mere politician. By the time Sinapo had climbed to charge altitude, he knew how to proceed. When he leveled off on station, he radioed Neuronius, his second in command, and as he summoned him for conference he nodded with satisfaction that Sarko had taken up his customary station, 50 meters below in a 50% tighter circle. Sarko had called to him only once on the way up, and Sinapo had ignored him. Now, as Neuronius approached, did Sinapo note a more casual, less deferential stroking of his wings? The striker would surely be his second in command, yet, unlikely as it might be, it could be anyone in the pack. Once, a hand of centuries ago, a young mid-pack rabble-rouser had struck successfully, destroying the elite. That is, the elite structure, and generally upsetting the entire hierarchy as he brought in his own lieutenants from up and down the pack. He had proved to be one of the better administrators, and Sinapo was in his egg line, twice removed. Neuronius rolled into conference beneath him, hook properly reversed. Sinapo's hook was still set aggressively. It would stay that way the rest of the day. There would be no more meek, deferential conferences of Sarko or anyone else, until these affronts and possible strikes were resolved. Sinapo got right to work on Neuronius. "It comes to me on a zephyr that someone is trying to supplant you in the hierarchy, Neuronius." He put it casually, as though he were an unconcerned, indifferent observer. He was looking for Neuronius's immediate reaction, a slight tremble twitch in the hook, a faint flicker in the redness of his eyes, an ever so slight fanning of the cold junction, the uncontrollable body language that one displays before one can steel himself to the shock of the unexpected. And there it was, a slight wave in the silhouette on the right, a bunching of the right deltoid muscle, the one that pulled up the right wing and readied it for the powerful downbeat. That was the typical guilt reaction, not a reaction in response to fear, the fear that someone was trying to supplant himself, Neuronius, but instead a response to guilt concerning his own ambitious plans. That guilt could lead to fear later as Neuronius pondered what Sarko's remarkable intuition might lead to, but at the moment it was only a symptom of guilt. Sinapo knew then that the shape of things within and without his tribe. He could scheme up suitable responses. Anticipation of the cerebral exercise involved, the challenge, filled him with keen anticipation. Nowhere was there room for fear, for anticipation that he might fail. Neuronius was a threat he could meet head on, And Sarko was an excellent engineer and an able administrator, but not the political animal that he faced in a tussle with Neronius. Sinapo listened keenly to Neronius's answer to the needling remark. "I do not fear such a change, if that Cerebron can serve you as ably as I," Neronius replied. Ah, suitably servile. He was not yet ready, not quite sure of himself. That called for a less aggressive response, at least for the moment. "We will meet again with the aliens tomorrow morning," Sinapo said. "I want you and Axonius to accompany me." Axonius was the third in the elite hierarchy, next in command after Neronius. It was essential that Axonius witness the ineptitude of Neronius and discredit him with the elite. Exactly how that would come about Sarko was not sure, but he did not lack confidence in his ability to carry it out in some fashion during their meeting with the aliens, or later. Neronius was not yet ready for command decisions, and might never be. Sinapo had merely to show that to Axonius, and simultaneously educate Axonius in the difficulty of command. Further, it would not hurt to condition Neronius in the direction that would encourage ineptitude. That was not statesmanlike, perhaps, but certainly the political thing to do. Sinapo had only to enhance what was already natural. Neronius was by nature a haughty beast who acted as though he were infinitely superior to all those below him in the Cerebron pecking order. Sinapo had only to encourage and to assure him that the aliens were also to be included in that inferior category. He made it seem as though he were asking Neronius's advice, confiding in him, passing confidential information to him, beyond that which he had provided the Cerebrons in Caucasus, and by bits and pieces he led Neronius to the conclusion that the aliens were weak, and ready to capitulate and leave the planet. He was careful, however, never to say that directly, but merely to imply it by innuendo. Sinapo was ready, then, for the next meeting with the aliens. Chapter 7 Crisis "How do we stand right now, Wooler?" Ariel asked. She and the two robots had just left the meeting with the aliens, and were traveling down Main Street in the lorry, heading for the apartment. The street lights stretched ahead toward the compass tower like a string of illuminated pearls in the dim light of a late dusk. The permanent dusk created by the dome. "In what respect, Miss Ariel?" Wooler asked. "With respect to the city, Wooler, the dome will be closed day after tomorrow unless we can get through to those monsters. What are you doing about it?" "We are moving the necessary material for construction of a second compass tower and city on the other side of the plain, 5 kilometers away." "Yes, I believe those were the very words you used earlier," she said. How could she be irritated by a machine that, given the same stimulus, came up with the same answer? "So your grand plan is to hop all over the planet, a jump ahead of the aliens, constructing compass towers and cities, weather notes, while they follow along behind, neutralizing them with their domes?" Was she still feeling guilty about Wooler 1 and taking it out on this poor machine that wouldn't even know if she were? "We tried first to neutralize them and lost a pilot robot and flyer," Wooler 9 said. "And then we tried to learn more about them and lost a surgeon and laser scalpel." "You could have learned a lot more about them by just talking to them." "That has not proved to be true, Miss Ariel, and did not seem to be necessary at first, since they destroyed only that one witness. They did not interfere with our endeavor once we enlarged the patrol circle to avoid the construction of the dome. It did not appear they were violating our governing laws, nor did they interfering with the prime directive until their construction work began to circle inward to close the dome. Then we did begin to talk, and they succeeded in learning our language, but we learned very little, except specialized terminology, which you have now determined to be meteorological in nature." "What about the central core?" Ariel said. "You'll surely not leave that behind?" "No, Miss Ariel. Our control computer's mainframe is immobile. When the black bodies begin construction on the last day, we will move it out to serve the new city." "Which will then be shortly covered by a dome." "Yes, that was why we hyperwaved Robot City for help." "Come upstairs with us, Wooler." Ariel said as Wooler 9 pulled up to the curb in front of the apartment building. When they walked into the apartment, both Jacob and Wooler 9 headed for the wall storage niches. "Jacob," Ariel said, "would you wrestle up some lunch for me? See if you can get a crisp garden salad out of that thing. And then sit down at the table. I'll freshen up and be right out." When she came out, the salad and a glass of milk were waiting on the table. Jacob sat across the table from where he had set her place, and Wooler 9 was standing in his niche. She felt uncomfortable when the human maniform, Jacob, stood in a niche. Her Auroran upbringing made it seem natural for Wooler 9 to do so. That was where he was supposed to be when he wasn't doing some task for her. And she should have felt the exact same way about Jacob, but his appearance didn't allow it. "Now," she said as she began eating, "our most pressing problem is how to carry out the objective of making this planet sustainable for human life, and at the same time avoid disrupting the weather. The weather does seem to be the main concern of the aliens. However, that's too tough to handle during lunch. It'll ruin my appetite and upset my digestion. Let's talk instead about the hyperwave noise, the other way we're apparently disturbing them. I can understand the weather problem, sort of, and even have a glimmer of what a puncture node is, hot air punching up through a cold air layer, I suppose, but I've got no idea what they mean by discrete and continuous modulation. What's all that about, Jacob?" "I'm not sure myself, Miss Ariel," Jacob said. "I'm aware of only one type of modulation of hyperwave, that which the aliens call discrete. Nor had I drawn the connection of hyperwave modulation of jump technology, which permits us to travel through hyperspace. Were you aware of such a connection, Wooler?" "No," Wooler 9 replied, "but I was aware that teleportation using a key to perihelion is technologically different from jump teleportation." "This seems to me a minor problem involving new technology that we obviously should have been aware of," Ariel said in true managerial style. "Get to work on it, Jacob." "Very well, Miss Ariel," Jacob said. "Where would you suggest I start?" For a moment Ariel thought that perhaps Jacob was being sarcastic, and then she realized that could not be the case. He was just a robot. Still, could the Robotics Institute have included an optional sarcastic module for the postronic brain of their humaniforms? Not likely, but it was an interesting thought that diverted her from these pesky engineering problems. They were more Derek's forte than hers. Social problems, people problems, sarcastic postronic modules, all those she doted on. Not pesky problems of meteorology and hyperwave. She was quiet for a while. Jacob at the table and Wooler 9 in his niche said nothing. Then she said, "Wooler, is there a chemo on the planet?" "Yes," Wooler 9 said. "Chemo, 8th generation, is in charge of key control." "There's your lead then, Jacob," she said. "It was merely a people problem, robot problem, after all. We want to develop continuous hyperwave modulation. Sinapo said there was connection between continuous hyperwave modulation and key teleportation. Chemo on Robot City manufactured the keys. Chemo here in charge of key control. Of all those here, should be the most familiar with key teleportation and the one most likely to fathom continuous modulation. See if you two can't cobble up some equipment to implement it." "Very well, Miss Ariel," Jacob replied. "Wooler," Ariel said, "find Jacob a comlink cartridge, plug it into him so he can find chemo on his own, and then come back and help me. With your knowledge of the aliens, we've got to figure out some solution to this dome problem." Jacob and Wooler 9, when not conversing audibly, close at hand, had been communicating with their cumbersome, long-distance radio frequency systems. The comlink cartridge would hook Jacob into their more sophisticated shortwave, microwave telephone network. "Very well, Miss Ariel," Wooler 9 said. Ariel did not hold out much hope that Chemo and Jacob would come up with anything significant. In her experience, ordinary robots just weren't creative. Yet there was that extraordinary exception, that brief period in Robot City where Shakespeare's Hamlet had lived again, supported by robot actors, and the robot Lucius had created his artistic masterpiece, the dynamically chromatic edifice called Circuit Breaker. A half-hour later, Wooler 9 returned. "Did Jacob locate Chemo?" Ariel asked. "I believe so," Wooler 9 said. "He had contacted Chemo over the comlink before I left." "Good. Does this apartment have a memory projector?" "Yes. The niches are equipped with sockets, and that wall serves as the screen." "Just what we need. How many times did you meet with the alien Sinapo?" 34. How long each time?" When Wooler 9 began reciting that list that contained the time for each meeting, Ariel interrupted him. "On the average," she said. 42 minutes, Wooler said. "I'll not have time to go over all that before tomorrow morning. Yet I desperately need some clue as to how we may resolve this dilemma. Wooler, while I'm thinking how to screen that material rapidly, download to Central Core just the dialogue of your meetings with Sinapo, and get a printout back to me as soon as possible." "Download in progress," Wooler 9 said. A fraction of a minute later, while Ariel was still pondering her problem, Wooler 9 said, "Download complete." A couple of minutes later she said, "I really don't know what I'm looking for, but I do know what I'm not looking for. Wooler, delete all sections of meetings dealing with linguistics and play back the rest at double speed." She could understand neither Wooler 9 nor the alien at that speed. Then, when she slowed it down so she could understand Wooler 9, she still couldn't understand Sinapo's Webster Grove accent. She finally slowed it down to normal and could understand most of what Sinapo said, but not all. She refused to slow it any further. Just as she didn't hope for much from Chemo and Jacob, she really didn't expect to get anything much out of listening to Wooler 9 and Sinapo. But it did keep her conscious mind actively on the problem, and left her subconscious mind to freewheel on all the correlated branches of the main subject. Neither her conscious mind nor her subconscious mind contributed anything of significance, during an inquiry that became dull and dragging after the novelty of watching and listening to a giant bat wore off. The courier from Central Core arrived with the printout of the dialogue late in the afternoon, and with that interruption Ariel decided to take a break and eat an early dinner. She had heard nothing from Jacob and realized she had been expecting him to return for dinner, when there was really no reason why he should, since he didn't eat and merely kept her company when she did. Still, it was a habit she had become accustomed to, and she missed him now that she was deprived of that pleasure. Was it Jacob she missed, or really Derek? She had only to ask herself that question, and the longing to see Derek and the flood of homesickness for the beautiful estates and green farmlands of Aurora overwhelmed her. She tried to put it out of her mind as she ate a lonely dinner, but it was not possible. Her mind rebelled from the magnitude of the problem that faced her on this alien world, and while she ate she wallowed in her loneliness and homesickness, and before she finished eating, tears of self-pity were trickling down her face. As she finished eating, Wooler 9 asked, "Are you in pain, Miss Welsh?" Ariel wiped her tears away with a napkin. "No, Wooler, just lovely." "Does my presence relieve your loneliness to any degree?" "No." "To what degree did my assistance this afternoon serve in the preservation of the city, Miss Welsh?" "Very little, I'm sorry to say," Ariel said. "Why do you ask? Did you expect otherwise?" "Certainly I had hoped otherwise, Miss Welsh. I proceed at all times in the direction that best serves the Prime Directive, if that does not violate the more compelling laws that govern my behaviour. I have been neglecting my supervisory duties in the construction and operation of the city, Miss Welsh, for I concluded that your imperative best served the Prime Directive. If that seems no longer the case, I must return to my duties, which are currently spread among the other 6 supervisors." "Very well, Wooler, return to duty. I will clear the dinner table, request a maid to serve you in the future, and then take my leave." "I'll clear the table, Wooler, and a maid won't be necessary. Jacob will suffice." "But he is on another assignment, Miss Welsh." "We'll handle it, Wooler. Just raise Jacob on the comlink, tell him to get back here no later than 10 p.m. and then leave." She was anxious to be alone. Wooler had begun to get on her nerves. Wooler and that alien she had felt compelled to watch and listen to all afternoon. "Will you be needing me at the meeting tomorrow morning?" Wooler asked. "No. Did you get hold of Jacob while you were chatting monitoring there?" "Yes, Miss Welsh. You'll be here by 10 p.m." "Then leave, Wooler." Despite her warm feelings for Wooler 1, she was fed up with this Wooler 9. Yet in his dialogue with the alien she felt there had to be some clue to the aliens, to their behavior, to their needs, to their culture, a clue to something that would make the aliens and humans compatible so that this desirable planet did not have to be abandoned and bypassed in the future. She turned to the printout the courier had delivered before dinner. Strange that archaic form of transmitting information, the printed word, had stayed around so long. Yet it was so strange when that marvelous instrument, the human brain, was taken into account. The speed with which she could assimilate the words and conjure related images, the speed with which she could scan the pages? She thumbed quickly to where Wooler had left off in his projection that afternoon, and scanned through the rest of the dialogue. 10 times the volume they'd covered that afternoon, and she did it in less than 2 hours, and got more out of it by being able to easily and quickly replay, fast forward, skip, and ponder over the significance of a phrase, a word. It was true that the Central Core had eliminated the alien's accent, and certainly that it sped things up, but the true efficiency came with the printed word itself, the strange archaic telepathy that extracted alien ideas from an alien mind and moved them into hers. Yet despite the ancient beauty of the printout, nothing of significance came from its perusal, no more than had come from the boring afternoon with Wooler and the memory projector. Still, her intuition told her there had to be a solution. She just wasn't looking at it right, or with the proper frame of mind, or in the proper place. If not the dome, where on this weird world was she supposed to look? The city was the problem, a weather node the aliens had termed it, an aggravating, uncontrollable irritant, like a grain of sand in an oyster, and the aliens were coating it, smoothing it to relieve the abrasion, like an oyster coats the sharp edges of a grain of sand with an iridescent nacre, mother of pearl. Now she was even beginning to think like an alien. This world is an oyster and the city and its dome are a pearl. Oyster world, pearl city. She had christened a world and a city. And she had gone no further by the time Jacob returned at 10 p.m. "Well, you're finally back," she said when he came in. "What did Chemo have to offer on the hyperwave problem?" "Very little, Miss Ariel," Jacob said. "Neither of us could see how key teleportation technology could be applied to modulation of hyperwave signals." "Did you examine the parallel dichotomy of hyperspace jump technology and the discrete modulation of hyperwave? That parallel connection should provide clues to the connection between the key and continuous modulation, right?" Ariel had first heard the word dichotomy on the way to Oyster World when Jacob had used it, and she'd been wanting to use it ever since. It had such a ring of erudition. Now she had played it back to him. "You're suggesting that we look for a connection between continuous modulation and key teleportation. Neither of us could see any during a lengthy discussion which concluded only half an hour ago." You dummy, she thought. The creative process is primarily a matter of drawing correlations. If there's a connection between discrete modulation and jump technology, as the aliens claim, you must first ferret out and understand that connection. Then maybe you can deduce what continuous modulation is by examining key teleportation for the parallel connection the aliens say exists there. She thought she had made that clear before he left. He, too, had heard everything the alien had said. "Tonight, while I'm sleeping," Ariel said, "examine everything in your memory concerning jump technology and discrete modulation of hyperwave. Go back and forth comparing the two at every point. Look for similarities. Correlate one with the other. And give me a report in the morning of all incidents where you see a similarity between the two." "Very well, Miss Ariel." She then retired to bed and thought about how she would like to see the full musculature of Jacob without his clothes on. And that made her feel guilty, and her longing for Derek came rushing in. The longing she had been pushing from her mind all evening that had probably brought on the unmaidenly notions concerning Jacob. She went to sleep, and sometime during the long night she dreamt of playing in a verdant Auroran cornfield with her personal robot as she had when she was a child. And then the robot became Jacob, and they were running and laughing as he chased her down the rows of tall green plants waving in the gentle breeze. And gradually he was no longer chasing her, but waiting for her at the end of the long row, far away. Yet it was not Jacob, and then she realized that Derek had come to Oysterworld, and he was standing there with his arms outstretched, waiting for her. Joyfully she ran toward him down the long rows of waving green. She awoke, and it was morning, and she was indeed on Oysterworld, but Derek was not there.